Etkinliklerimizi takip eden dostlar anımsayacaklar. Son 2 yıldır uluslararası çocuk yazınından çok değerli yazarlar konuk olarak çocuk ve gençlik edebiyatı günlerinde yer alıyorlar. Bu bizim için çocuk edebiyatının evrenselliği açısından çok önemli ve heyecan verici etkinliklere imza atmamızı sağlıyor. 2 yıl önce Bridget Labe, sonra Osa Lind bize destek verip İzmir'e gelip bizlerle söyleşen çok değerli etkinliklere katılan yazarlarımızdı. Şimdi bugün bizlerle birlikte John Boyne olacak. Çizgili pijamalı çocuk, yanlışlıkla dünyanın öbür ucuna uçan çocuk, zirvenin dibindeki çocuk, olduğun yerde kal. Bu kitap isimleri çocuk edebiyatına tutkun yetişkinler için de çok şey ifade ediyor. Köklü bir edebiyat geleneğinin yaşandığı Dublin'de dünyaya gelen John Boyne'un çizgili pijamalı çocuk efsanesini eminim hepiniz biliyorsunuzdur, muhakkak okumuşsunuzdur. Onun bu efsanesiyle başlayan çocuk romanları kurduğu gerçeklik ve yazınsal nitelikleriyle çok önemli bir boşluğu da dolduruyor. Çizgili pijamalı çocuk ülkemizde de pek çok okulda okutulmuştu öğrencilerimize. Ayrıca bu romandan uyarlanan bir de sinema filmi var. Çizgili pijamalı çocuk İrlanda'da 80 hafta boyunca 1 numarada kaldı. Dünyada da 5 milyondan fazla sattığı söyleniyor ve yazarın yapıtları 43 ayrı dile çevrildi. Ben öncelikle Ege Çağdaş Eğitim Vakfı Genel Müdürü Şule Hanım'ı davet etmek istiyorum ekrana. Ardından da sevgili John Boyne'a hoş geldiniz demek istiyorum. Buyurun Şule Hanım.
Dear guests, today we have a very distinguished guest. We have the pleasure and privilege of hosting John Boyne, the world-renowned author of The Boy in the Striped Pajamas. John Boyne, hello and welcome.
Hi, how are you? Good to be here.
Very good to be hosting you today.
I just wish I was there in Turkey.
Thank you. We are truly thrilled to have you today in Izmir Children's and Young Adult Literature Days. In accordance with the concept of our event, today we wish to talk more on your work for young readers.
Okay.
7 of your novels are published in Turkish, thanks to them Publishing Group, of which 5 are for young adults. And we have many questions in mind, but shall we start from the beginning, from the early years? How was your life as a child and a teenager, your family and entourage? And how did they contribute to who you are today? When you were growing up, did you enjoy reading? What were your favorite reads? Please.
Well, firstly, thank you for inviting me here today, and to all the people tuning in, thank you for taking part in this session. Well, I grew up in Dublin in the 70s and 80s, so I guess it was a time before we had computers and iTunes and all the computer games and all the kind of distractions maybe that young people have today. And so a lot of my life really was built around books. There's a beautiful library down the road from the house I grew up in, which is still there. And my mother used to take myself and my brother and sisters to that library every week on a Wednesday after school. And it was a big part of my week. I really, choosing those books was always very important to me. But even as a young reader, I already started writing. I felt reading and writing were completely connected to me. I couldn't really do one without doing the other. So even at sort of the age of 9, 10, 11, I was taking characters really from books that I was reading and writing new stories for them. And, I guess sort of learning how to write dialogue and plots and themes and so on. And like a lot of writers that I've spoken to over the years, I had a real fetish for stationery, for like nice pens and nice paper. In fact, I've got like right beside my desk here, I've got all these lovely fountain pens and things. So, yeah, I still kind of love that kind of thing. And I used to really enjoy just getting blank pages and nice pens and sitting down to write stories. And I think, I'm sure there are some young people here and even the older people that if you're very lucky in life, sometimes when you're young, you know exactly what it is you feel like you want to do or that you should do. And you don't really have to ask yourself too many questions about it. And for me at a very young age, that was writing. It was, wanting to tell stories, wanting to write books, wanting to have like a shelf behind me of books with my name on them. And I never really veered off that path. I was very focused from right through my teenage years. I was writing stories all the time, very, very focused on it, sending things out to magazines, to newspapers, and I started getting some published. when I was in my late teens, which of course gave me the confidence then. It made me feel like maybe this wasn't such a crazy idea. And it really kind of just carried on from there. But what I was reading as a young person, probably the same as now, in the sense that anything that just interested me. I've never really been, there's not an awful lot that I exclude from my reading. The only thing really is I'm not really a science fiction person. But other than that, as a child or an adult, if I see something that interests me in any genre, or if somebody recommends something to me, or if I read about it in the paper and somebody says it's very good, then, you know, I'll investigate it. I'm happy to do that. Of course, I find authors that I like. As a kid, I loved the Narnia books very much, C.S. Lewis's books. I loved, there was a book called The Silver Sword by Ian Sereller, which was a wartime story, which had a big effect on me. Most of the time, books that sort of left children on their own in the stories without adults. A lot of books about orphans. And even in the books that I've written since for young people, I do tend to get rid of the parents quite early on. Either I kill them off, or they're just very distant. And I think as a kid, what you want is to see the child being the hero of the story themselves. You know, that opening line of David Copperfield, whether I'm the hero of my own story or not. And that's what I liked to read. And that's what I went on to write.
Well, you almost answered my next question. I would ask you about your journey as an author, and how did you start to write, and what triggered the urge to become a writer? And were there any authors or books that inspired you specifically, I would ask, if you'd like to add anything on top of that.
Well, I think the only thing I'd add to what I've said is that I was very encouraged by my parents. And I think they saw that, even though they would have been, and they are, they're still here, the kind of people that would generally sort of say, you know, get a real job, you know, get a pension. I think because they saw that I was actually, you know, actively writing. I wasn't just sort of saying I want to be something without actively doing anything about it. Because I was actively writing all the time, and they could see that, and I was giving them things to read, they were very encouraging on it. So when I went to university in Dublin and did my did an English literature degree, and then I did a creative writing master's in England. So, you know, I was on the kind of path that I needed to be in order to write. Of course, after that, it was down to whether I was going to be good enough. You know, I mean, I could put in all the time in the world, but if I was no good, I was no good. But I suppose over time, you know, if you are putting in all those hours, you will improve. And you know, I'm a better writer now than I was 20 years ago. And even then, at 20, you know, my 20s, I would have been better than I was as a kid. So, yeah, I mean, I was encouraged a lot, but most of it really, I suppose, did come from within myself, that I felt this was the life I really wanted to live.
Mm-hmm. Very well. Your first novel was published in the year 2000, if I'm not mistaken. And during the 19 years following 2000, you released 19 novels, if I do not miscount. And you have short stories as well. You're very productive and hardworking as an author. How do you work and write? What's your one day like when you're working on a novel, for example? Do you have any specific routine you follow, or places you choose to write at? Which factors affect your productivity the most?
Yeah, well, firstly, I think when you look back to, say, 19th century novelists, people like Charles Dickens, for example, they were producing a novel every year. And a lot of the time they were having to serialize it in magazines along the way. So they couldn't go back and change anything. So I'm a big believer in discipline and hard work as a writer. I've never been the kind of writer who's going to publish a novel every 5, 6, or 10 years. I think, you know, that's not specifically a sign that the novel is somehow better. You know, if Dickens can write Great Expectations in a year, then, you know, I don't see why the rest of us can't. But my day is, well, I mean, during the times when I would be at home, you know, outside of the COVID time, when I might be traveling to festivals or book tours. If I'm at home, I'm up very early. I'm up about 7 o'clock. And my day is really broken up between reading, writing, and just the general things you do during the day, you know, the normal life. I don't sort of sit down and say, right, I'm going to sit down from 8 a.m. till 5 p.m. and just work. It doesn't really work like that for me. It's more that I'll do maybe an hour on the book that I'm working on, and then I'll take a break and I'll do something else entirely. I'll read, or I'll go for a walk, or I'll do the shopping or the laundry or something. And then I'll come back a couple of hours later when I'm a bit more recharged again and do another hour or so. And I'm sort of in and out of it through the day. I have this office here, which you can see me in, and I have one in my back garden. And I kind of move between them. But I never sort of think that it's about getting X number of words down or X number of hours done. It's more that at the end of the day that I feel I have achieved something, that I haven't wasted too much time. And it's easy to waste time. We can all waste time on sort of surfing the internet and, you know, all sorts of stuff that we can waste time on. I just like to feel at the end of the day that I've moved the story along a little bit. I always have a novel that I'm working on. I'm working on one right now, a second draft. And so I'll print out a few pages. I think I have some here beside me, actually, of the one I'm working on. Because it's a second draft, I'll print out a few pages of it, like one scene, and I'll make all my notes on it, and I'll feed that in, and then I'll come back to it later, and I'll print it out and feed it in again and over and over. And I try to get through each draft that way. And after maybe about 7 or 8 drafts, it feels like it's ready to show to my editor. And at that point, I can't see it sort of anymore. I need a fresh pair of eyes to look at the story and the language and the writing and tell me what it is I'm missing. And I'll do another couple of drafts after his suggestions and notes, which I like. I like working with an editor. I think I'm good at working with editors. So that's really how it works. And then over the course of a year or so, I seem to be able to put a novel together. But it's always important to me to keep one on the go, though, because I don't feel very happy if I don't have something to work on. You know, it's just it makes me know that I've got something to come into my office, to sit down and just block out the world and just get down to writing.
Well, so this is a proof that you are very hardworking.
But you have to be. I mean, hard work is good, and there's a difference between hard work and a chore. You know, I don't dread sitting down here. You know, I look forward to it. There's some days better than others, obviously, but hard work can be very enjoyable as well if it's something you're passionate about.
Yes, it depends on what you're working with. That's right.
Yeah.
So most writers generally focus on one area, but you're writing both for adults and young readers. And I see that the publication years of your books are intertwined. How do you divide your time and concentration? How do you synchronize your work between different novels?
Well, when I started writing first, I never really thought about writing for young people. It was all really about adult novels. And it was only when I wrote The Boy in the Striped Pajamas that I began thinking about, you know, that I started writing for young people. And I've really, really enjoyed it. It's been a real gift to me, I think, in my life, to be able to write these young characters and to bring them to young readers and schools and libraries and so on. I like that kind of, I always seem to have sort of quite an innocent character at the center of a story, usually sort of an 8 or 9-year-old boy who is a bit lonely, a bit on his own in the world. And moving back and forth between the adult books and the young people's books, it's not so difficult. It's almost, when you finish one, that part of my brain is almost overloaded with it. And I kind of switch to another part of my brain. And it's quite, it recharges me in some way. I quite like it. Also, the children's books the young people's books are generally shorter. They're only about 50,000 words, whereas my adult books tend to be about at least twice that. But it's just a different part of my head. But I don't make the stories any simpler. You know, the books I've written for young people have 3 of them have dealt with war, 1 of them with the death of a parent, and 2 of them with gender issues. So I'm writing the same level, I think, of serious subject. And I'm not making the language any easier or anything like that. I'm just writing it with a child at the center of the story. And I really like doing that. I found that most of the time with the adult books, they're a first person narrator. So I'm, as the writer, I'm sort of trying to get as deep inside the psychology of one single character as I possibly can. Whereas with the young people's books, it's almost always a third person. So I'm almost like a storyteller, a narrator, stepping back and telling a story to young people about this character. And I do enjoy that. And I do like the innocence of those central characters, because even in those serious books, I think I put a lot more humor into the young people's books than I necessarily have in the adult books. Oftentimes I've put the child in the center of a very adult experience way before his time, but his lack of understanding of that world can make for occasional humor in the story, which I think can be quite welcome for the reader.
Well, do you prefer one over the other? Do you enjoy more writing for adults or for young readers?
I don't, to be honest. I like them both, and it would be very difficult to sacrifice either. And I think the balance I found in my head of doing both works well for me. To me, it's all novels. You know, again, when you go back in time, we didn't so much distinguish between adult novels and young people's novels. You look at something like Treasure Island, you know, Robert Louis Stevenson, or Kidnapped, or, any of those great classic stories, David Copperfield, and Oliver Twist, you know, these kind of books have been read over the years by adults and by young people. I think the best literature can be read by both. I think nowadays, you know, because we have bookshops where things have to go in certain places. You know, over here is the contemporary fiction, here is the classics, here is the young people's, here is the crime novels. So we tend to split things up in that way. But I'm not sure for a writer if you always think that way. I mean, a crime writer, for example, is sitting down to write the very best novel that he or she can write, which just happens to have a crime at the center of it. So I just see them all as novels, and I don't really enjoy one over the other. I just like the process is always the same for me. So I enjoy that process. Well,
The Boy in the Striped Pajamas, it's a very striking story that passes during the Second World War. And it introduces us with two boys born on the same day, but living on two different sides of the fence that surround a concentration camp. They make friends naively, unaware of the crime against humanity that's around them. The book was a huge success. It touched hearts of millions all over the world. The Boy in the Striped Pajamas received many awards, both in Ireland and abroad, and it was shortlisted for many others. How do you feel about the book? How was the creation process? We know that it was a short time. In your opinion, why was this book extensively embraced by the readers?
Well, it's more than 15 years old now, and I feel very good about it. It's a book I'm very proud of. When I wrote it, I've spoken before, I think, about, I wrote it in a short space of time. I wrote that first draft over 3 days. It was a story that poured out of me. And I had been very interested in the subject matter of the Holocaust since I was a teenager. I had, really read a lot about it, was fascinated by it, and wanted to understand it better. And I think all of that reading came together to bring that story to life for me. And, I didn't ask myself too many questions at the start. I had just the idea of the two boys at the fence and wanted to, write the story that would bring them there and the conversations they would have. And it was an extraordinary experience, because when it was published, it was my 5th published novel, but the first one to really kind of break out in that way around the world. And people came to it so quickly. I think the reason it touches a lot of people is, well, firstly, obviously, the subject matter itself is one which is a very emotional one. And it's one that, can affect people very profoundly. But I've never really liked thinking of it as a Holocaust novel. I think of it as a novel about friendship, ultimately. It's about two little boys who are desperately lonely, who have both been taken away from their homes, both brought somewhere that they don't want to be, and both don't understand what they're doing there. And all they really want is somebody to talk to and somebody to play with. And, you know, a lot of the time you could boil a lot of life down to that ourselves, that, you know, what do we want in life really? We want a friend, you know, we want someone to talk to. We don't want to be isolated or lonely. And I think their friendship and the innocence of their friendship touched people. And then, so because the novel has such a dramatic and powerful end and a surprising end, that I really kind of pulled the rug out from under people's feet and shocked them. And it was the only possible ending a book like that could have, because it's the ending that the real life stories had, of course. So it was important to do that and to have this brutality really for the reader at the end, so that the reader would put the book down and be, you know, really have a strong reaction to what they just read. And so, yeah, it's something I feel very proud of. And, you know, I know I've spoken in schools around the world to children about it. And I know a lot of young people now, it's in schools that can be the first introduction to the subject matter. But what I always try to impress upon people is that my novel is subtitled A Fable, a work of fiction with a moral at the center. It's not an accurate representation of the camps necessarily, and it's not a true story itself. So I always encourage young people that if they're moved by this story and by these characters and the journey they go on, then there's a whole library of books out there that I hope they would investigate next. The biographies, the autobiographies, the non-fiction works, so that they get a more authentic understanding of the subject that I've created just as a fable.
Mm-hmm. And the novel was published in 2006, and short after, it was adapted into a movie, which made the book even more famous. Did you like the film? Did it meet your expectations? And how does it feel to see the characters you created on paper in flesh on the silver screen? And do you generally enjoy the films adapted from the novels?
I thought it was a very strong adaptation. I didn't write the script, but I worked quite closely with the director. And I was out there a lot in Budapest when we shot it. And I think it's a very faithful adaptation of the book. I think any changes that were made are actually strong changes that work. You know, you've got to, going on screen is a sort of a translation in itself. And you've got to do some things visually that you can't do on the page. And I thought that was great. I was very happy with it. And I mean, it differs from book to book. I mean, you see some great adaptations of good novels and bad novels, and some bad adaptations of good novels and bad novels. So it differs from book to book. It's something I want to get into. I've started during COVID. Actually, I've started writing scripts myself and starting adapting. So I'm going to turn 50 in what date is it? In 13 days time. So I wanted a new challenge.
April, right?
Sorry?
13th of April.
Yeah. So I wanted a new challenge for the 10 years ahead. So I'm starting to write scripts myself, and I'm seeing how the challenge is in that and the difficulty. But it's fun to do. But I think anything that gets the book into more people's hands is great for any writer anyway.
Mm-hmm. Well, your other novel set on the background of World War II is The Boy at the Top of the Mountain. And it tells us the story of Piero, who in time evolves to Peter. The loss of his parents drags him to a life very close to Hitler, and we witness that innocent boy being corrupted and poisoned by authority and allure of power. The book was released in Turkish with a slightly different title, which may be translated as The Boy at the Foot of the Top of the Mountaintop. Let us listen to the story of Piero from you and the themes you emphasized in this novel.
Yeah, well, one of the smaller points in the first book, in Striped Pajamas, is the older sister Gretel and how easily she is brainwashed into the Nazi ideas just because she has a crush on a young lieutenant. And I wanted to expand on that. So in Boy at the Top of the Mountain, I took this character, Piero, who is half French, half German. His father has fought in the First World War. And when his parents die, I said I'd kill off the parents early on. I kill off both of his parents in chapter 1 in that book. And he goes to live with his aunt, who is the housekeeper in the Berghof, Hitler's mountaintop retreat outside of Salzburg. And it's a story really about how easy it is for anybody to be corrupted, because Piero starts the novel as a very kind, thoughtful, considerate little boy. And over time, when he's at the top of the mountain, when he's with Hitler, he starts to enjoy uniforms. He starts to enjoy the power that comes from being connected to this incredibly powerful man. And as he moves into his teenage years, he becomes the absolute opposite of what he has ever been. And I wrote that thinking that, you know, we can often look back, or look back, say, at the war and say, well, if we had been there at that time, I wouldn't have done that. I wouldn't have been part of that, which is very easy to say from the distance of time and geography. You know, if I'd been a 17-year-old boy in Berlin in 1938, it's, you know, can I categorically say that I would not have signed up and, you know, been part of it? I can't say that any more than anybody else can. So, you know, I wanted to make it, write this book about how easy it is for us to lose sight of who we are, really, and allow ourselves to effectively go over to the dark side. And that's something that Piero has to deal with at the end of the book, when he realizes just what he has been responsible for and the amount of cruelty he has contributed to, even in his own small way.
Mm-hmm. And when you're writing on historical events and characters, you use both fact and fiction. And it's a delicate balance between the two. And was it a challenge to write Adolf Hitler, Eva Braun, or Nazi generals, their words, their gestures and outfits? And how did you balance history and fiction? How did you make your research, for example?
Well, with that, because I had already read so much about the subject, and even like there must be, I don't know, 8-9 years between those two books as well, and I had been talking about it for so long that, you know, I was pretty much as much of an expert as anybody today can be on the subject. But I watched, you know, there's quite a bit of documentary footage of parties taking place in the Eagle's Nest, and I watched those, and of course I went to it myself. I visited it and spent some time there, and at the top of that mountain, and tried to understand. You know, you look around, you're trying to. What does it smell like here? What does the air feel like? What's the view? What, you know, you're trying to get as much authenticity onto the page as possible. So, you know, the fact that it still exists, or part of it was bombed at the end of the war, but part of it still exists and you can visit it. And that was very helpful to me. And for the people who I bring up to the top of the mountain, like Eva Braun, for example, and Himmler and Goebbels, you know, it's just about kind of reading about them and then developing, you're not really recreating them, you're creating a fictional representation of them, of what you think they might have been like, and putting words into their mouth. And certainly Hitler was the most interesting one to do there, because we're so accustomed to Hitler as the person who is all, like in documentaries, always kind of so loud and shouting and aggressive. Whereas I felt at the top of the mountain in this very peaceful place, he would be calm. And for the reader, knowing who he is, that calmness could almost be quite frightening in itself, because you never know at what point he's going to suddenly snap, you know? But I've done that in a lot of my books, both adult books and young people's books, where I've taken real life characters and brought them into the story. And it's something I feel quite comfortable with, and it's something I quite enjoy doing.
Mm-hmm. So stay where you are and then leave. This one has the background of World War I, and it's about the little boy Alfie Summerfield, who suffers the agonies of war and its aftermath, and he struggles to reunite his family. The three protagonists in 3 books, in what ways are they and their experiences similar or different, you think?
Well, yeah, I guess it's my sort of like wartime trilogy for young people. They're similar in the sense that all 3 are kind-hearted, innocent boys. And that's how they start out. As I said, Piero changes, but the other 2 are kind-hearted and innocent, and so is he when he's 8 and 9. They're all readers. They're all fascinated by the world. They all are very intelligent, but they all want to understand the world better. They're at that point in life, 8, 9, 10 years old, when they don't want to be seen as a child anymore. They want to be treated more grown up. And all three are going through this terribly grown up experience. For Bruno, it's being brought to this concentration camp. For Alfie, it's the fact that his father is in the trenches and then in the hospital and suffering what we now consider post-traumatic stress disorder, and was then called shell shock. And for Piero, it's the death of his parents and the sudden realization that he has more power to hurt people than he realizes. What they have in difference. I suppose Piero is the most different in that way. He uses it, for evil, whereas the other two are. Piero's the only one of my characters in the young people's books who has this dark side to him. All the other characters in the children's books I write tend to be, if not saints, they tend to be just genuinely good-hearted people, which in many ways perhaps makes Piero the most realistic of my protagonists, because I guess we're all capable of moments of great kindness as well as moments of unkindness. I'm sure we all have things we can look back on in lives and regret and feel ashamed of. So he's probably the most realistic in that way. But they're all old before their time, because that's what happens to children in war, isn't it? Really, like they're taken away from childhood and thrust into the heart of a very adult situation that they haven't asked to be part of, and that by rights they really shouldn't be part of.
And at this point, there is a very relevant question from our audience. Do you plan to write on the war going on in the Middle East or war-imposed immigrations?
That's not something that I have any particular plans to write about at the moment. To be honest, I feel like I'm a bit worn out, with the 3 children's books, and I've written a couple of adult books. The Absolutist is set during the First World War, and I feel I've written about it quite a bit now at the moment, and I've been writing about different things in recent years. But as with any writer, if a good idea came to me, if a good story appeared in my head, and I felt that I could write this and I should write this, then I would.
The 3 of the 6 novels you wrote for young readers, they all feature wartime settings. And in these novels, you told us heartbreaking stories and sufferings of children, and at which times it was overwhelming to read. And how do you feel when you're writing them? Does the war theme have a reference in your own life or family? And why did you choose to dedicate half of your books to this background? What do you expect readers to learn from this?
My family doesn't have really a great connection to it, because Ireland was not particularly involved in the war. And I think that's something that's not to be proud of, to be honest, because, we were neutral during the Second World War. But of course, had the Nazis won, well, what's the next country over from England? It's Ireland. So we would have been invaded pretty quickly after the Nazis had won, had they won. So I think in a moment like that, I don't think it's great credit to us that we remained neutral. But anyway, we don't have a big history of that. So I personally don't. I suppose it's just an interest in the way that anybody listening to this today can just be something that you are interested in. And it's very fertile territory for a novelist, though, because within war, you have bravery and cowardice and death and grief and fear and, the good guys and the bad guys, to put it quite simply. So for a novelist, there is so much you can do with wartime settings, and, characters change so much through a novel set during the war. In my adult novel, The Absolutist, the difference between Tristan Sadler, the narrator at the start of the book, and who he is at the end of the book is immense. And I would imagine anybody who has ever been to war would come back with that complete divergence of character between them. So it does give you a good structure for a book. But I don't have any particular personal relationship to it.
Okay. And one of our audience asks, who was the one who categorized the Boy in the Striped Pajamas as a novel for young readers? I think they imply that it should be an adult novel, maybe.
It was me. It was me, actually, because when I finished it, I gave it to my agent, and I specifically wrote on the front of it a novel for young readers. And I thought, because it had a young character at the center of it, I thought, that's what it would be. And sure enough, it was published in that way. Now, very quickly, it seemed to kind of broaden out, and it became something that was read by people of all ages, which I was very pleased about. But in the first instance, I felt, with a child at the center of it, and because it was written in that almost fairy tale-like way, I felt it was a novel that in its first publication should be aimed at young readers.
I see. Now, let us pass on to another genre. The terrible thing that happened to Barnaby Brocket. The 8 years old Barnaby unwillingly floats up into the sky, which is something very irritating and unacceptable for his parents, who are obsessed with being normal and ordinary. Then one day he floats away, ends up making a tour around the world, and he meets different people from different walks of life who had also become outcasts, as they were not deemed not normal by their closest ones, in fact. And then in 2019, you wrote, "My brother's name is Jessica," and it's about a boy and his brother who is a trans girl. It created controversy among different circles for different reasons. Let us talk about these themes now. And young characters, in each of them, they are struggling in their own ways to embrace their differences. Why do you think it's important to write about what's labeled as normal, ordinary, or extraordinary, or about diversity or marginalized characters in young adult literatures?
Well, when I wrote Barnaby Brocket, the previous books I'd written up until then, both for young people and adults, were quite sad and quite dark. And I really felt like I just needed to lighten the mood.
Yes, there's a lot of humor in it.
Yeah, I wanted to write something funny.
Loudly at several passages.
Good, yeah. Well, see, what's nice for me writing it was that once you start using that part of your brain and you start putting in jokes, it's such a relief after, all these very heavy subjects. And I loved writing about Barnaby, and I loved the fantasy element of it, the fact that, he floats and doesn't obey the law of gravity. And the minute you buy into that concept, then you can have so much fun in the book, with him and his dog, and you can just kind of laugh. And, yeah, and I enjoyed that. But what I, liked was the idea that there are so many young people who feel that they are different in some way. I certainly felt I was when I was a kid. And sometimes you can be afraid of what it is that makes you different. When what I wanted to do in that book was tell people, actually, the very thing that makes you afraid of being different is the thing that you should embrace. You should be glad that you're different, that the Brocket parents want everybody to be the same, to be normal and boring and, never set a foot out of line. But actually, the people that interest us the most in the world usually are those who do something different, whether it's go to the moon or, are the best footballer or a great singer, or it's people who take a chance and embrace what it is that makes them different, that we like. So I wanted to do that. I wanted to show young readers that if you feel there's something inside you that might frighten you and that doesn't seem like what everybody else is, then stop being frightened of it, because Barnaby isn't. And then when it came to My Brother's Name is Jessica, I wanted to write about a trans character very much. It's been on my mind for a while because I had some trans friends and wanted to understand that experience. And for me to understand an experience is generally to write about it. In the writing is how I learn it, how I understand it. But I wanted to write it from the point of view of the younger brother who is watching this experience take place before him, the person he's always thought of as his brother becoming his sister, effectively. And the boy being upset and confused and frightened by this. And over the course of the story, realizing actually there's nothing to be frightened by, that the person you've always loved is the same person, just with a new name and, you know, a new identity. And that compassion is what's important here. That love doesn't change depending if the person changes. So, you know, I thought that was a very important book to write. And I think it was misunderstood generally by people who hadn't read it. You know, when it came out first, there was people who criticized it and said they hadn't read it and they wouldn't read it. And you can't take those kind of people seriously, I don't think. I think it's just moronic. But it's a book I'm really, really proud of. I think it has, you know, a lot of empathy, a lot of compassion, and again, a lot of humor.
Yes. And there's a question. Did you receive any negative reactions when you are, talking about these issues?
Yeah, sometimes, you know, certainly. And I think that's okay. I mean, I think all good literature should provoke differences of opinion. I'm not expecting everybody to read my books and love every aspect of them or, you know, anything like that. You know, I read books that would challenge me and make me think, I'm not sure, you know, if I like that or I agree with the stance the author is taking or what the author is saying. I think it's perfectly fine. In fact, I think it's good to be able to argue about books and debate about them. But I think if you're going to do it, it has to be done in a respectful way and with an understanding of what the author's intentions are. The author can fail in his or her intentions, but that does not make the author a terrible person. And I think when it came to Jessica, a lot of people felt that, you know, I mean, with social media and Twitter and things like that, you know, people feel very energized by throwing out, you know, criticism and brutality and threats and unkindness online. And you just have to shake that stuff off because, you know, it's just silliness. But I have no problem with sort of people, you know, I've had people put their hands up at an event in real life and say, look, I have an issue with Boyne pajamas, say, and they explain what it is, and then I'll explain my point of view, and there we are. That's fine. You know, I mean, that's what we do as adults, you know, so it's fine. I don't mind that.
Someone asks when Barnaby's mother cut him loose, it was very shocking and unacceptable to read for us parents, probably even more. And did you write it as a criticism to adults?
No, not really a criticism to adults, because the Brockett parents are really over the top. You know, I mean, they're so ridiculous and nasty. I mean, they're like, you know, I was thinking of the kind of parents you'd read in Roald Dahl, you know, those kind of like really, really crazy parents. So I don't think there are people that, I mean, let's face it, the boy floats. That doesn't happen in real life. So I don't think, it wasn't a kind of an inherent criticism of parents. It was more about sort of enabling the boy and letting him have his individualism and so on.
So it was an experience which turned out the best for him, maybe.
For Barnaby, it does, and also for all the people that he runs into around the world, who, as you mentioned, you know, have been exiled from their families for one reason or another, but usually for being different. And he manages to bring all these families back together while his stays apart.
Yeah. You probably visit schools and come together with hundreds of children and teenagers in the non-pandemic times, of course. Which questions do they mostly ask to you? What are they most curious about?
Oh, what car do you drive? And how much money do you make? I always ask the young audience, like, how many of them think they'd like to be writers? And I'm always amazed by how many put their hands up. That, you know, there is so much creativity in schools. Really? A lot more, I think, than when I was a kid, because I think teachers today encourage creativity in a way that wasn't so much when I was a kid. So it's always really nice to see that. So I get asked questions about, you know, how to get into publishing, how to write, you know, any tips that I might have, and so on. And I like that. You know, I enjoy talking to people about books and about creativity, whether they're, you know, 90 years old or 9 years old.
Mm-hmm. And how was your experience with the pandemic over this last year? Do you think it changed you or influenced your work? In your opinion, how will this pandemic change the world, society, and humanity from here on?
I haven't had it too bad because I'm accustomed to working from home anyway. So, you know, I haven't had, my work day hasn't changed too much, but my travel life has, obviously, and I've missed that a lot. But I don't know. I mean, I keep wondering, like a couple of years from now, when this is all in the past, will we all go back to the lives we lived, or will people be working a couple of days from home? You know, the climate has improved. Obviously, the planet has improved without people, you know, running around the world all the time. And I think we've grown. I feel closer to my family, for example, than I've felt in many years, just because we've really had to. Well, they're the only people I've seen. You know, my sister lives down the road. My parents live about 10 minutes away. And, you know, for the last year or so, I mean, they've pretty much been my social life. And I've enjoyed that, actually. You know, it's been nice. And I mean, I want it to end. I want to get out. But I just want it to end. I'm sure we all do. I just want to go to the pub, you know, want to have a drink and meet my friends.
One shared common wish.
Yeah.
And now we are almost out of our time, but I have a couple of little questions. And what advice would you give to teachers, librarians, and parents who choose books for children and teenagers?
Well, I think it's important to let children find their own way in books, and not always to be sort of saying, you have to read this or you have to read this. You know, the kind of book that you might have enjoyed as a kid is not necessarily the kind of book that your son or daughter might enjoy. So let them find their own books, and from there, you know, ask librarians. Like if you're a parent, say to them, you know, well, my child likes fantasy books. What can you, even if you don't like fantasy books, if the child does, let them read their fantasy books. Or if they like war books, or they like romances or whatever, you know, the child can find their own way through books. So I think we have to let them do that rather than always say, you've got to read this.
Well, let us share the good news with our audience that your novel, A Letter to the Sky, is scheduled to be published in October in Turkey by Deli Dolu brand of Tudem Publishing Group. Any upcoming works you would like to share with our audience and the themes you are planning to write on?
No, I sort of keep those things to myself until they're done. But I'm looking forward to Turkish readers reading A Ladder to the Sky, which is a novel I'm quite proud of. It's about writers and about how horrible we can be.
Well, John Boyne, thank you very much for being with us today. I hope we may repeat this meeting soon, but this time face to face.
I hope so. Yes.
We hope to be hosting you in Izmir then.
That would be great.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you all for tuning in as well. And I hope you enjoy the rest of the session.
For making time for meeting us. Goodbye for now.
Goodbye. Thank you.